Hi now.
Hello, good morning or good afternoon.
Let's switch to the topic now. Naomi, what we just saw was a sort of a big discrepancy in the US between Democrats and Republicans. Sometimes from a European perspective, one feels that, well, climate change is viewed quite differently in Europe than compared to the US. Why is that so?
Well, this is the question that Eric Conway and I set out to answer when we wrote the book Merchants of Doubt. We were trying to understand why was it that there was this huge discrepancy between the way the issue was viewed in Europe versus the United States, and also a huge discrepancy between the way scientists were talking about the issue and the way it was being presented and discussed in the mass media and in the public discourse.
You analyzed thoroughly the different science papers looking at global warming, and you came out saying, well, there is a very clear bottom line. There is no doubt. But all the same, in your book, Merchants of Doubt, you say, there is a bias in all that. Who are these merchants of doubt?
The story we discovered that we wrote about and told in the book and in the film was that you could actually trace the origins of climate change denial to a handful of men and one particular place. So this is a kind of origin story that we told where we were trying to answer the question, who are these people? Why are they challenging the scientific evidence? And why are they saying all these things that fly in the face of the scientific conclusions? And what we discovered was a very interesting and complicated story about a group of Cold War physicists who began challenging the science, not just about climate change, but a whole host of issues that involved public health and safety. So it included the dangers of tobacco, it included the reality of acid rain, it included the problem of the ozone hole. And in each case, they challenged the scientific evidence. And in each case, they did it in the same way by saying, well, we don't really know, the science is unsettled, and therefore it would be premature for the government to do anything about it. And what we came to realize was it was that last piece, the piece about the government, that was really the crux of the issue. These people were cold warriors. They were very fiercely anti-communist. And what they feared was that issues like climate change or acid rain or the ozone hole would be used as an excuse to expand the reach of government, to justify restrictions on personal liberty, let's say to tell people that they couldn't smoke cigarettes or they couldn't use the products that depleted ozone, and that this would be used as an excuse for a kind of socialism by the back door, a kind of slippery slope to socialism. And they even referred to environmentalists as watermelons. They claimed they were green on the outside but red on the inside. So they saw the whole thing as a kind of reds under the bed conspiracy. And then they began to make common cause with other people who also wanted to prevent action on climate change for other reasons, such as obviously the fossil fuel industry.
Let's look a bit in detail at the grammar of these merchants of doubt. So they have a sort of a similar pattern. If you look at the tobacco story, if you look at climate change, it, I believe, always starts with, well, doubt or deny the facts. That would be chapter 1 in this opera.
Exactly. Part of the reason we realized there was a story to tell was because we noticed a pattern. What we noticed was that the people who were denying climate change were using the exact same language, the exact same rhetoric, as you say, the same grammar, the same syntax, as people who had previously denied the scientific evidence of the ozone hole. There were sentences where you could take the phrase climate change out and put ozone depletion in, and the sentence would otherwise be exactly the same. And so when we saw that parallel, we thought, okay, there's something going on here. And then we started doing research, we started digging, and then we discovered the link to the tobacco industry. And we found that link, then we said, okay, this is not a scientific debate among scientists about scientific facts. It's a political debate that has to do with a lot of things that have nothing to do with the science. And as you said, sort of rule 1, or the key first step, is this idea of doubt. They would create doubt, they would manufacture doubt, they would sell doubt, and so that's where we got the phrase merchants of doubt. The key to creating doubt is to create a sense of controversy, to create the impression that there's a scientific debate going on and therefore we don't really know what the truth is. And the tobacco industry pioneered this strategy, but it was then taken up by climate change deniers to recruit people to act as scientists to create the impression of the debate. If you actually look closely at the credentials of the people who are challenging climate science, what you find is that in most cases they're not scientists at all. In many cases, they have absolutely no professional scientific credentials. Or in other cases, they are scientists, but they're not climate scientists. And the original merchants of doubt who we studied were physicists. And so that was actually a key part of how this story works. Because these men were physicists, in fact, they were very, very prominent physicists, very famous. One of our key players, a man by the name of Fred Seitz, was actually a former president of the US National Academy of Sciences. So these people appear to have credibility, and journalists get taken in by this. They say, oh, well, this is a former president of the National Academy of Sciences. That's a person who we have to take seriously. So then they interview that person on television, or they quote them in the newspapers, and then the impression is created that there's a real scientific debate going on. Now, in reality, that man, Fred Seitz, is not a climate scientist. He's not doing research on the climate. He never did research on the climate. But the American media would put Fred Seitz on television against one out of the thousands of scientists who were actually working on the problem, and create the impression of debate, and create the impression that the debate was essentially 50-50.
Now, what is the motivation for even an exposed scientist to change the side? I mean, why does he do that?
I think he honestly believed that he was protecting freedom and constraining the government and preventing the government from becoming overbearing, tyrannical, intrusive, this sort of thing. So I think that for Fred Seitz, it was actually authentic. We could say that he was misguided. He did damage. I don't justify what he did, but I think in some weird way, it's understandable in historical context. But the bigger problem then is this whole set of people who then jump on board in this program. And that includes the fossil fuel industry, a whole set of think tanks, particularly here in the United States, right-wing media, pro-business media like the Wall Street Journal, Fortune, Forbes magazine, the Financial Times to some extent, not so much lately, but in the past. So you have all of this right-wing media who then jump on this and who really milk it in order, well, for their own purposes. Some cases simply to sell newspapers, sometimes because controversy is more interesting than agreement. I've had many journalists say to me, conflict sells copy. If everyone agrees, there's no story, but if people are fighting, there is a story. So the media really play into this. They milk it, they exaggerate it. So the media plays a really big role, in my opinion, has quite a bit to answer for in terms of the role that they did play in perpetuating this, fraud might be a little bit of a strong word, but perpetuating this disinformation campaign.
Yeah, if you look at the rules of the media world, you also find that, the general audience looks at, the quality of a person, not only looking at, his scientific background, but in his capability to transfer a message, to be compatible with television, to explain things in a very simple way. Is this also part of the world fueling this sort of bias which is being established?
A big part of this problem also has to do with the way scientists communicate. So when scientists go on television or on the radio or speak to journalists and try to explain climate change, in general, they do a very bad job of it. I mean, there are some exceptions, but in general, scientists tend to be verbose, they tend to be obscure. As one of our merchants of doubt says, they tend to be boring, and it's true. But on the other side, what you have now is a whole generation of these merchants of doubt who are now very highly trained, and some of them are even professionals. So, for example, in our film, we profile one particular man, a man by the name of Mark Morano. Mark Morano is a professional climate change denier. It's what he does for a living. He worked for many years for Senator James Inhofe, who in the United States is the most notorious climate change denier in the US Congress. This is what he does for a living. He's very trained, he's very professional, and he's good at it. So you take someone like Morano, who's very skillful and very message conscious, which he himself will say in public. I mean, I'm not saying anything that he wouldn't admit to. And then you put that against, a very geekish, technical, nerdy PhD scientist. And if you set it up as a debate, the scientist will always lose. Mark Morano will stay on message, he'll be clear, he'll be focused. The scientist will be wandering, he'll be complicated, he'll be unclear. And at best, the public is just confused. And at worst, the public gets the impression that Morano knows what he's talking about and the scientist doesn't.
we can see that it's a scenario starting with denying the facts, then doubting scientists, creating a controversy with others. But at the end, it is even very fiercely in the sense of attacking even scientists. So this becomes very personal for high professional scientists.
It has become personal, and I think one of the things we see over the course of the history of this story is, in a way, it goes from bad to worse, because, as you say, it begins with challenging the science, the ideas, the facts. It's sort of abstract, but then it moves to actually attacking scientists, and that's where, you know, it really becomes nasty, ugly, and in a way kind of disgraceful, that you have these very, very wonderful scientists, prominent scientists, who are working hard to do their job, who are doing the thing that we as society ask them to do, which is to try to sort out these complicated technical issues. And when they do that, they get attacked. And not just that their science gets attacked, but they get attacked personally. So we've documented, and there's been a lot of media coverage about this, you know, various different things that have happened, lawsuits filed against scientists, their emails being stolen, subpoenas for their private records, and all kinds of terrible things said about them in the news media, alleging that they are, you know, alleging fraud, alleging one climate scientist here in the United States, Mike Mann, was compared to a child molester. So, I mean, really disgraceful campaigns of defamation, all of which is designed to discredit the scientists on the theory that if you discredit the scientists, then of course you'll discredit the science as well. I started getting hate email. I was attacked by Senator James Inhofe. He made a speech on the floor of the US Senate in which he cited my paper, and I can't remember the exact words, but basically said it was part of a liberal conspiracy to bring down global capitalism, which I thought was pretty strange, since I feel like academic life, if anything, tends to be a little lonely. You know, if there is a conspiracy, you know, I'd like to find it, you know? So, yeah, and then, yeah, various things. I mean, if you go on the internet now, you can see I'm a witch, I'm a Marxist shrew.
Now, if we look at climate change, is there a chance, perhaps even in Paris, that knowing the grammar, knowing your sort of X-raying of these patterns of doubt, that we end up really with a consensus? Or do you say, well, these merchants of doubt are still much too strong, and we as an audience are too ignorant to well, understand?
Our hope in writing the book Merchants of Doubt was that by exposing it, people would come to understand it, and that once you saw the pattern, you would realize it and you would recognize it, and then you wouldn't be fooled by it. And I think that is true. I think that people who are honestly interested in understanding the issue do have that result. They say, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So I do think that for many people, understanding how this works is really, really important and even transformative. But, you know, we often say there's an optimistic and a pessimistic reading of our book. So as you say, we can make a parallel with the tobacco story, and the optimistic reading is, well, tobacco is not prohibited in the United States, but smoking rates are greatly, greatly reduced from what they were in the 50s and 60s because of various kinds of tobacco control laws, taxation, different instruments that have been put into place. So that's the good news story. But the bad news story is it took 50 years.
Now, you have children, I have children, and we both know that believing in scientists, climate change is going on, we don't have endless time, we really have to change things. Now, looking at your analysis, well, in the evening, what is your feeling? Is it sort of resigning? Is it saying, well, I understand why they don't do it? Or or are you still optimistic, saying, yes, we will be able as Homo sapiens to change things?
So in a deep moral sense, I don't feel I have the right to be resigned. I feel like I have to do what I can. And for me, as a historian of science, what I can do is this kind of funny piece that fell in my lap about climate change denial. And now it becomes a story of time lost. We should have started acting on this too after the Rio meeting in the UN Framework Convention. We've wasted 20 years. We should have. We've wasted 20 years. And so my message is also a message of urgency. Like, we've wasted time. Let's not waste more time.
My wife always says hätte Fahrradkette, which means should have, and it phrases with the chain of a bicycle, Fahrradkette. Well,
Right.
Okay, I think so. We are done. But the last final question is there any point which you definitely would like to stress out? Did I miss something?
No, these have been great questions. It's been really a pleasure speaking with you today.
Okay, thanks so much. Take care.
You're
Bye.
welcome. You too. Bye-bye.